Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Jason. How are you?
Pretty good. I had to pull out the portable heater for the pod cave. It can get a little cold in the wintertime in the basement here, so haven't had to do that for a while, but otherwise everything's okay.
Yeah, it's been quite the change in weather here in Calgary in the last 7 days since we last recorded. Woke up to the big snowfall on Monday, and it's been, snowy and cold ever since, which, I think we had a pretty favorable fall, and we had nice weather extend late enough that we got to watch the CPL final in relatively mild conditions. But yeah, it seems like winter is now finally arrived in Calgary.
Definitely. But even though winter has arrived, I think we have a lot of things to talk about on this week's podcast. But before we start talking about that, Scott, what is the YYC Soccer Podcast all about?
So we focus on soccer in Calgary at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels. We talk about the soccer teams and players from Calgary, whether that's grassroots and amateur leagues and teams, all the way up to the university and professional level.
And this week, we're going to do a bit of a postseason wrap-up on some Cavalry things. We're going to do a couple updates on what's going on in the NCAA men's and women's tournaments, a bit of information about how some Calgarians are doing overseas, and we also have an interview this week.
Yeah, earlier today, we talked to Noah Hrdlicka, who is one of several players from Calgary on the University of British Columbia Thunderbirds, who recently won the USports National Championship. So we had a good chat with him about that, as well as some other teams he's played for throughout his young career.
Yeah, it's a pretty good interview, and we'll get to that in a little while. But I think we'll start off this week's episode with talking a bit more about Cavalry.
Hey, this is Mason Trafford, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Talking about Cavalry, today we're recording on Thursday evening, and just a few hours before we started recording, the Canadian Premier League announced their best 11 of the season. So essentially, I guess the All-Star team, first All-Star team. There was some pretty solid representation from Cavalry on that team.
Yeah, as you could expect from the championship-winning team, but 4 out of the 11 are from Cavalry. So no real surprises, honestly. On the defensive end, you've got Dan Klomp at center back, and then Fraser Aird at fullback. Easy choices, I think. Fraser Aird definitely had his best season in a Cavalry jersey. Dan Klomp has always been one of the team's most important players since he signed. So those two in defense, not a surprise at all.
And up front, we've got Ali Musi and Tobias Warshevsky, and again, not surprising picks as well.
No, especially Warshevsky, who is, of course, the league's top goal scorer. And then I think Ali Musi was an interesting pick, just considering how much of the season he missed with that ankle injury. I thought he missed something like a third of the campaign or something like that. But clearly, when he was fit, Cavalry had a major resurgence in their attacking creativity. He's such an important player for Cavalry. He's a spark plug for the offense. And so those are the 4 Cavalry players that made the CPL's All-Star team.
I don't expect we're gonna see tons and tons of news out of the Cavalry camp over the next week or so, but I guess I could always be wrong on that. But one thing we did want to go over is I tried to do a bit of research and try to figure out who's still under contract, who's out of contract, who has a club option right now. So I was able to put together a little list, and I thought we could chat about it, Scott.
Yeah, kudos to you, Jason, for taking the time to do this. But you've compiled all the players from the roster and listed them either as under contract for 2025, a club option for 2025, out of contract, status unknown, developmental or USports contract, or if they're going to return to their parent club. So I guess we could go through the sections and mention who's under which.
Let's start with the players that are under contract for next year. There's no option. Their contract is in place for at least 2025. And there are 9 players, and it's Marco Carducci, Charlie Trafford, Sergio Camargo, Nicholas Veiling, Chinan Chanda, Eric Kobza, Diego Gutierrez, Fraser Aird, and William Accio.
And then for the club option for 2025, there's 8 players on this list. We have Callum Montgomery, Ali Musi, Jesse Daly, Tobias Warshevsky, Malcolm Shaw, Shamit Shom, Michael Harms, and Joseph Holiday. Quite a few names in there, Jason. I think Cavalry fans will want to see back in 2025 for sure.
So let's talk about the club option players here. I think right now, when you look at that list, there are some that are, I think dead obvious that either the option's going to get picked up or just an entirely new contract will be negotiated. So Ali Musi, Tobias Warshevsky, I think those ones are pretty much no-brainers. I would think Shamit Shom as well would be in that category. And also, I think Michael Harms, why would you not bring him back? He didn't play much, but he showed tons of potential and is still pretty young. So what do you think of those 4, at least to start with?
I would agree completely with those 4 names. Especially Shamit Shom, who, as we talked about some episodes back, was really Cavalry's unsung hero in 2024. He played, more minutes than any other outfield player other than, I think, Dan Klomp. And he was a real cog in Cavalry's midfield, and he had a great game in the final against Forge. But yeah, every other name that you mentioned, I would agree with wholeheartedly.
Okay, well, let's talk about the other 4 that didn't fall into that category, and we're talking about backup keeper Joseph Holiday, Malcolm Shaw, Jesse Daly, Callum Montgomery. So my view is that those players are not exactly sure things like the first 4 were, but what are your thoughts on those 4, Scott?
Callum Montgomery is an interesting case study because I felt that he had a slow start with Cavalry. I don't think he had a really strong first half of the 2024 season, but he definitely picked up his performance toward the end of the campaign and had some strong showings in the playoffs as well. As for Jesse Daly, we know that he had an injury at the end of the season, so didn't feature in the final weeks. We saw him on crutches with an air cast. I can't remember how serious the injury was, if he would be fine or not quickly. Beyond that, Malcolm Shaw, another interesting case study. He really wasn't playing very much at the end. If he did play, it was kind of as a late sub to give Warshevsky some, a break, right? So it was hard for him to really show what he could do. But when he was getting a lot of playing time earlier in the season, he didn't manage to find the back of the net very often. And he had a lot of bad luck in that regard, but he also squandered the occasional chance. So tough to say if I think Malcolm Shaw is going to be back for Cavalry. Otherwise, I think you're right. Joseph Holiday, did he play one game?
No, he didn't play at all. Yeah. Of these 4 players, I actually think that probably there's a couple of them that I think are likely to be back. I think Cal Montgomery is how he ended his season was pretty positive. And then also when you consider the person in our next category out of contract, Dan Klomp, I think that if you have a veteran center back, who did, like I said, he knows the team, he finished up strong, it would seem to me that you might want to bring him back, considering they might be losing the centerpiece of their back line right now.
Yeah, you want some continuity in your back 4, especially in the center back position. So that's a good point to bring up.
On the other players, I think Joe Holiday is probably a reasonable chance to come back. Like, he's been with the club for a couple of years and he's still young. Yeah. And I don't know, I guess if they happen upon someone else that they fancy more, but I think that would be probably a pretty safe bet. But if I think for, Malcolm Shaw, like, he fills a role and that sort of thing. But I think he's a less certain to come back. And Jesse Daly, even before he got injured, it was kind of a bit of a down year for him, but that one could be, open for debate. But I think I'm kind of expecting Montgomery and Holiday to be back for sure.
Yeah, I agree with Jesse Daly. I think Diego Gutierrez and Shamit Shom really struck up a good partnership as the 2 anchor central midfielders, and it was really hard to break apart that chemistry. So it was just like, how could you not start them together every match by the end of the season? At least that's how Tommy appeared to be looking at it.
The next category is out of contract, and that's 2 players that we know of, and that's Dan Klomp and Tom Field.
Yeah, the question was raised after the final if it would be Dan Klomp's final game. And I think that was also a question that was asked in 2023. And we know that Tommy said earlier this season that they were working on extending a contract for Dan, but you have to assume with how talented he is and the fact that I don't want to say that he's too good for the CPL, but he's one of those obvious choices for a player who could make the step up to, say, MLS, which we know he has said in the past is a goal of his to make it to that level.
Yeah, I think he's been a fantastic team player, and even though he's mentioned publicly, even on our podcast that his goal to move up, he has ambition to move up. He's always been committed to the club, but I think if he's out of contract now, I think that he's probably going to, if an opportunity at a higher level comes up, I kind of expect that he would take it. I think in the summertime we talked about maybe the Cavs transferring him out so they got some value from him, but I think it just turned into a situation where they just needed him too much to finish the season that they just decided to let the contract run out, and he was a big piece of the championship run. And now in the end, I think you would say, geez, it was worth it. They didn't get a fee or anything like that, but they got some silverware, so yeah, worth it.
Which you could very much argue that they would not have won the championship without Dan Klomp in defense this year. So, I mean, maybe, but he's so important to the team, and it would be a great way to go out, right, as a champion. If that's your last contribution, then you can't really argue with wanting it to end in such a nice fashion.
We can move on to status unknown. And when I was looking around, I poured through press releases and I looked around a bunch of different places. There are 3 players that I could not find what their status was. And that was Maël Henry, Lowell Wright, and Bradley Camden-Fawo.
And I honestly would like to see all 3 of these players back with Cavalry next year. I think Bradley Camden was, he really nailed down that starting left back spot. The one thing with the way that he plays the position I found is he is very defensive. He maybe doesn't get as forward as much as, say, Fraser Aird was on the opposite side of the pitch. But, he's such a rock defensively. He's hard to get around. He's physical. I think he's a player who wingers are afraid to take on. So he was a great signing for Cavalry last year and carried that into 2024 as well. Maël Henry, terrible luck with injuries this year, but in the few games that he did play, he had an immediate impact on Cavalry's at the time sputtering offense. He scored that great goal, I think, against Vancouver FC. Really made things happen for the team at a time where there were a lot of question marks being raised, and it was really unfortunate that he suffered another injury so soon after coming back from the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to see all 3 of these players come back. I think Henry and Camden-Fawo, I think maybe are a bit more likely. In the last couple categories, developmental USports contract, that's Nico Myroniuk. So I'm not really exactly sure how these USports contracts work, but I think in some way his rights are retained, and he's either under contract for 2025 or Cavalry will have an option to sign him. So he's the one that falls into that category. I thought overall he had a pretty good year, considering he's still one of the youngest players on the team.
Yeah, is he even 19 yet? I don't think so. If he is, he would have just turned it.
Yeah,
so
I think that's right.
He's still a teenager. He got a handful of appearances and starts this year. I thought he looked really good in some games and then a bit quieter in others, but you have to assume that the longer he plays at the pro level, the better he's going to get. I think he has a lot to offer, and obviously, there's room for improvement, but that's always going to be the case when you're 19 years old.
For sure. The last person to mention here is Jay Herdman. He was, he's been returned to his parent club, the Whitecaps. He was a great addition to end the season.
Yeah, I think if you reflect on the season as a whole, he was probably the best left winger that they had this year. If you think about everybody who played in that position, Nicholas Veiling, Willie Akio at the very beginning of the season, Nico Myroniuk, of course, had some games on the left. I think that Jay Herdman fit in, quite quickly with Cavalry's playing style, and I think Tommy clearly liked him. had a glowing review of him, a couple of press conferences, and clearly, Jay, as soon as he got his first start, he scored. So he brought, I think, a little bit of a goal scoring threat to that position, and we saw that in the final. Even though he wasn't able to find the net, he had a couple of good chances and created some chances too.
But he was a good ad. I think if you ever wanted to do a case study on bringing a player in for like a couple months of value all around, value for the team, value for the player experience, like this is a textbook good case, I would say.
I agree.
Before we wrap up CPL stuff, a coaching announcement today with Cavalry Connection.
Yeah, with the distant Cavalry connection, you have to go back to, I guess, 2019 or 2020. But Mauro Eustachio, who was on Cavalry's inaugural roster, he's been the assistant coach at York United for a couple of years. And with the recent departure of Benjamin Mora, the club announced today that Eustachio, who is just 31 years old, will be taking over the head coaching role at York United.
Yeah, kudos to him. I think that's great. I think pretty impressive at that young age to be taking on that role. So my original thought was that York United was probably going to go somewhere external, maybe mining another one of their connections in Mexico. But yeah, clearly they're impressed with him, and yeah, good for him.
Yeah, we're seeing this in world soccer a lot, where clubs are hiring younger and younger head coaches. Germany in particular has been doing this for a while. If you think about in the Bundesliga right now, you've got Nuri Sahin at Borussia Dortmund. You had Julian Nagelsmann at various clubs from the age of 28 onward. But, Mauro will bring a former player's perspective, and he'll bring the perspective of someone who's been with the CPL since day one, which is cool. And it's great that we're seeing he would be the first former CPL player to become a head coach. And that's a really cool story in and of itself.
For sure. One more note, the Foot Soldiers made an announcement this week, kind of a cool thing about their end of the season award that they give out every year.
Yeah, the Foot Soldiers give out a player of the season award, and just, I guess, last week or earlier this week, they announced that henceforth that award will be called the Dylan Powley Memorial Trophy, which is a really nice tribute for Dylan Powley. He, of course, did not play for Cavalry, but he did play for Foothills PDL team in, I want to say, 2016 and 2017. He went on to play for FC Edmonton and Atletico Ottawa in the early seasons of the CPL, stayed involved with the sport after hanging up the gloves, tragically passed away in a motorcycle accident this June. I think the day of or before, a League One Alberta game that he was going to referee. There was a really touching tribute to Dylan at the CPL Awards on Thursday night 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm. 2 weeks ago, I got it.
Yeah. It was pretty emotional. Tommy gave his speech reading a letter that Dylan's parents had actually written. But no, really, really nice tribute from the Foot Soldiers to rename their Player of the Season trophy.
Agreed.
Hi, guys. This is Noah Hrdlicka, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
All right, Jason. So we'll introduce our interview guest now. As mentioned at the start of the episode, we talked to Noah Hrdlicka, Calgarian, one of many Calgarian players currently playing for the UBC Thunderbirds, who recently won the USports Men's National Championship. I've made a similar joke before, but I'm going to do it again. The Trans Mountain is not the only pipeline from Alberta to Vancouver. There was also a soccer pipeline.
Absolutely. When you look at the championship tournament, there were 3 players on UBC who played every minute of the championship. And that was Marcus Kaiser, Brendan Fierst, and our guest, Noah Hrdlicka. And there are some other players that are also involved in that team from Calgary. I believe there's at least a couple others. It's a significant number of players that have been brought to the coast. And even when you think back to even last year, Sebastian Zitkowski, was the player of the year in USports, and he was a UBC player from Calgary. So the connections there are strong.
Definitely. And for some of those players you mentioned, this was kind of like a final hurrah. We'll let Noah kind of talk about that more, but it was the senior season for a few of them. And it was a great way to go out, isn't it? Winning a national championship in your last game for your university team. You really can't ask for more than that.
Let's run that interview now.
We'd like to welcome Noah Hrdlicka to the podcast. Noah is from Calgary, but he has spent a lot of his career thus far in British Columbia. He was a member of the Nationals winning UBC Thunderbirds this fall. He's also played in both League One BC as well as League One Alberta for a variety of teams. Before that, when he was in high school, he was a member of the Pacific Soccer Institute, which was run by Thomas Niendorf in Victoria. Noah, congrats on the recent Nationals win, and welcome to our podcast.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's really nice being here. Appreciate you having me on.
I rattled off some of the teams you've played for since you were kind of quote unquote an adult, but we always like to get the background of our guests, especially the Calgary connection. So can you talk about what clubs and teams you played for growing up before moving out to the island?
Yeah, definitely. So I played for quite a few clubs growing up. I feel like I've almost played for every club in Calgary by this point now, but so I started off when I was younger. I was playing for Southwest United. And then once I moved into U10, I played a couple seasons with Chinooks. And then after Chinooks, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but I played with NSD for a few seasons as well while I was kind of in late elementary school. And then, yeah, so at NSD, I had a really, really good coach named Troy Flannery. I'm sure you guys are familiar. And Troy ended up moving to Southwest United again. So once I kind of went into junior high in grade 7 and 8, and I wanted to stick with Troy, so I ended up going back to Southwest. And then after that, I ended up moving to Foothills from like around, I think it was 2013 kind of to 2015 before I went to the island. So I've kind of been with a lot of different places, but been pretty grateful. I've had some really great coaches along the way as well. So
I do want to ask you about PSI and playing for Thomas and how that kind of set you up for the teams that you've been with since.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, living in Victoria and getting coached by Thomas, it was a really, really good experience. I think one of the most important things I learned when I was there, because I moved away from home, I just turned 16. So being from Calgary, moving to Victoria, it was a little bit of a tough transition. I was quite homesick at first, but I think it was really, really good. Thomas, I have nothing but good things to say about him. Like his training sessions and how much I developed as a player and as a person under him was really, really good. And I think it prepared me for the next level. Being with Thomas, I actually had the opportunity. So I did move to Germany as well for a year after I graduated high school. And that was through Thomas's connections too, which was pretty cool. And I stayed there for a year. But I think that all really just set me up to being able to come to UBC and perform at the level that I've performed at. And yeah, it was just overall really, really good experience.
But we want to talk a bit about UBC. You know, it's been a successful program historically. What was the key to success this year that led to the national championship? Do you think there was any differences between, say, this year and other years?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think out of all the teams that I've been a part of at UBC, like we've had so many good teams, so many good players. And one of the best things about UBC that I found is our locker room and the culture that we have. I don't really think I've ever been a part of a closer group of guys over these past 3 years, and consider myself really, really lucky. And I mean, the past 3 years we've had, 2 years ago, we got silver. Last year we got bronze, and this year we finally won gold. So we've kind of done all three in the past 3 years. But in all honesty, I think one of the biggest things we had this year was like luck was on our side. Like, I think like out of all these three teams, like I can't really say if this year's was a better team than the past 3 years because all 3 years were really, really good. But I think in some big moments in the past couple of years, luck hasn't been on our side, and this year it has. So I'd say that's probably the biggest factor. I have to be honest.
So as Jason mentioned, and you alluded to, the strength of UBC, consistently one of the top programs in Canada, as you mentioned, making it to the national tournament. Every year you've been with the program, which means, of course, winning or finishing runner-up in Canada West. I wanted to ask you about the pressure of playing for like a conference powerhouse. And if there is a pressure to win every match, I'm curious, like, do you feel that opponents come to UBC or when they take you on, it's almost like a cup final for them because it's such an opportunity, or Or are there teams and opponents that maybe are a little timid and afraid of you because they know, of course, how strong the program is?
Yeah, I mean, playing with UBC, I would say there is quite a bit of pressure. I do find, especially within the last couple of years, that most games, like, you're going to get the best of every team you play, and they're going to come out and they're going to be fired up. And it can be like with the USports season, you're playing 2 games in a weekend and you're on a road trip and you're going to some place, tough conditions, tough areas to play, and they're wild up and they're ready to come at you. So it's definitely difficult, but as I've been throughout the program, especially playing the past 4 seasons, it's something you do get used to and that we are used to with UBC. And I think it definitely helps with like Mike Mosier, my coach. He's been there for so long and he has so much experience with all of this. And I think he does a really good job at managing the dressing room and ensuring that we're always focused and ready to be put in these situations. But I know he'd always say, like, pressure is a privilege. Like, pressure brings the best out of people. And I think we're pretty fortunate as a program to have that. And especially with the type of players that we get to, I think it kind of starts from training. Like, we get so many good players. And I find that we have so many guys who might not even make our 18-man roster who could start on any other U Sports team. So that obviously starts in training. Like, you're putting pressure on yourself in training because you want to perform and you have so many good players around you and you're competing for a spot, and that translates into games. So
I think there were a fair number of veterans on the UBC team this year, but it was as you mentioned, it was your 4th season. So you would be in that veteran group. Like, how did it feel to be in that position? And do you think that you took on a bit more of a leadership role this year as a result?
So I actually graduated in May last year, and my plan was not to come back for this season. And then I was reached out to by Mike in the summer asking if I wanted to come back and kind of do a little super senior run. Because it was like I was in the 2020 class and we missed our first season because of COVID. And then so I still have eligibility to play. And so this was kind of we're calling it the last dance throughout the year. And it was a lot of guys within that 2020 class and I don't know, the last kind of hurrah together. But yeah, I mean, I think in all honesty, I think last year and this past season, I stepped into a much bigger leadership role. I think after the 2022 season, we had a really large class of guys who ended up leaving. We had I think it was in the national final, 6 of our starters ended up graduating that year in 2022. So I think in 2023 and this past season, I took quite a big leadership role, but in all honesty, I really, really enjoyed it. And I think it's going to prep me for a lot of things like going forward. I think I learned a lot about how to deal with different personalities within the locker room. Like, there's different guys who you kind of have to deal with differently based on who they are, and how they react to things. But yeah, it's been really, really good and just a really good learning experience in general.
Of course, UBC has a strong Calgary connection this year, and has for a couple of years now, if not longer. What is it like to have so many people from Calgary on the Thunderbirds? Because I don't think it was always like that, 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome. Like, I love Calgary. I love where I'm from. I love people from Calgary and so many close friends, and it's nice as well. Like, having them out here, you go back to visit in Calgary. They're still in Calgary as well. So yeah, I don't know. I guess Mike's liking the Calgarians and it's been working the past couple of years as well. But yeah, it was like one of the reasons why I came to UBC in the first place too, is because one of my really, really good buddies, Daniel Kaiser, who used to play for Cavalry, he was already playing for UBC and I played growing up with him as well. And then now I'm playing with his younger brother, Marcus Kaiser, and lots of other, like with Eric Kim and Brennan First. Like, there's tons of guys. So it's been working. So I've really enjoyed it. Yeah.
What's your plan beyond this season in a soccer sense? Are you looking at coming back? Are you entering the USports draft, or where are you at for your future plans?
Honestly, before this season, I was kind of like, okay, you know what? This could be the last hurrah with soccer. Like, maybe I move on after this, but I don't know. Once you get back into season mode and you're playing games consistently every weekend and you remember how much fun it is and being with the guys and stuff, and especially after winning this year, it's really just turned up my motivation. So my plan is I want to continue to keep on playing. I'm kind of looking right now at exploring some potential opportunities overseas. Maybe that comes in January, hopefully. And also, yeah, like, I want to enter the USports draft. I want to see if teams are interested or willing to pick me up. But yeah, if not, really look at my options and just want to play for the next couple of years. Kind of see where it takes me, kind of see what level I can reach. And then if I'm not happy with where I am in the next few years and decide to come home and kind of start my working career, that happens. But kind of see where the soccer path takes me.
we're going to shift focus and ask you about League One. We've talked a lot about UBC thus far and what's coming for you. But of course, as I mentioned off the top, you have a lot of League One experience, both in Alberta and BC. We've talked to players who've played in both, and we like to ask them how they compare. How do they compare, having played for, I think, 4 teams now in the League One system?
I'd say they're pretty similar. Personally, I think the standard in League One BC may be a little bit higher, especially just since this was like the first real year that League One Alberta kind of took off. And I'm sure it'll go up from here, obviously. But from my experience, especially in the first year that I played in 2022 in League One BC, there was some real good players, like some really, really good talents. Like I know my team that I was playing on, which was Varsity FC at the time, we had some solid players on that team. And like we had a couple, I think my coach at the time, he did a really good job at balancing out the team because we had some senior guys, like some guys, like I don't know if you guys know who Caleb Clark is. He's a striker and he played kind of from the BC system. And some guys like a guy named Joe Zupo, who's our assistant coach now, and Mario Kovacevic. These are all guys who were like in their early 30s, late 20s who came in, and they were really, really good for the squad too in terms of leading and mentoring certain guys who were younger. But yeah, I'd say League One BC, I'd say the level's a little bit higher. But at the same time, yeah, I think there's going to be tons of room for improvement in League One Alberta, and I only see it going up from here, especially with next season coming up. But yeah.
I noticed that you were in that $1 million soccer tournament last year.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to talk about that? I don't think we've had anybody on that participated in that, what that experience was like.
It was surreal. It was such a cool experience. So I had one guy, I mentioned his name, Mario Kovacevic. He used to play for U of T in the early 2010s kind of. And so he was actually out here for med school or doing his residency in Vancouver. And he kind of got close and affiliated with the team. And we have a men's league team affiliated with UBC. So he was playing on that team. He was kind of a mentor leader for the guys. And so he actually went down to that tournament in the first year and his team ended up losing in the final. So like they were really, really close to winning the $1 million. And so since they did so well, he actually was able to get a spot back for next year with the owner. And then we kind of built a team like from the Vancouver area. But it was such a crazy experience, like going down there and like some of the professionals I saw, like I remember I walked in, they had like a whole like little base area for all the athletes village. And the first day we kind of got there early and we're just walking in. I walked through security with Giovinco, like as soon as I walked into this like athletes village, and I was like, holy crap, that's insane. And like seeing like Aguero walking around kind of like a normal person and playing games, like walking past Nani, and even like seeing some NFL players because JJ Watt was playing and Chad Ochocinco. And it was such a cool experience. And going down there with like a really, really good group of guys, we kind of had like a UBC mixed base and then a couple guys from Ontario area, but it was pretty cool. And playing 7v7 as well, people don't realize, but it's a much different game than outdoor. Like the strategy kind of behind it and things like that. It was really, really awesome. That's for sure.
Is the team coming together again this year or has that been decided yet? Or
yeah, we're trying to figure some stuff out, I think. One big thing is you need a sponsor who's willing to put down some money for you. So we're still trying to figure out some details and maybe a couple alterations to the team. But yeah, to be determined. Gotta kind of figure that out coming in the new year.
Like as a player, how would you kind of describe your playing style? Because you mentioned, you're, I think, naturally a center back, but you have played fullback as well. So clearly some defensive versatility, but how would you kind of describe yourself as a player?
I'd say my biggest assets on the pitch, I'm a really, really big communicator and organizer. I think that's super important. And especially for young players, like being able to talk as a center back and organize people in front of you. And in all honesty, just being that calm presence at the back. Like you can sort out problems on your own and really, really take responsibility to sort out things on the pitch on your own. I think that's very important. And I think that's one of my strongest assets. I also really like to build from the back. Like I describe myself as a center back who's good at playing on the ball and really comfortable on being on the ball and breaking lines and playing through the midfield, playing forward. But yeah, I'd say those are probably like my 2 strongest qualities in terms of soccer. And yeah, just really that leader, that presence on the field, calms everyone down. Calm presence from the back. But
any messages you want to get out there, Calgary soccer community, or anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, the Calgary soccer community, I look at it now from when I was younger and how much it's grown is insane. Like looking at some of the opportunities and stuff and the things that they're doing in Calgary soccer, it's awesome. And I just want to say, I don't know, for young kids out there, take advantage of the opportunities that you have. Life is very, very short, and your football career can be short, but in all honesty, just work hard every day and always believe in yourself. I think some people get caught up in if they're having a bad season, or they may have a coach that they don't agree with or they don't specifically like per se. But I think the biggest factor is just believe in yourself. I was someone who kind of came into UBC, and when I first came to UBC, I was a little bit lost with where I was and what I wanted to do with my life and in terms of soccer, and wasn't really playing my first couple of years. And then I was able to break my way into the first team and become a really crucial piece to a national winning side. So I think the biggest thing is just put your head down, work hard, keep going forward.
That was pretty well said, and I think a great place to end this interview off on, Noah. But once again, congratulations on winning nationals with UBC in your final attempt. That's a fantastic story, and
Thank you. Appreciate it.
we wish you the best of luck with whatever the future holds for you, and we'll be keeping an eye on it. So kudos.
Awesome, guys. Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay. Thanks again to Noah for doing the interview. I did want to mention one thing before we move on to the next topic, Scott. I brought up that $1 million tournament. That is a really fun event, and I could have probably talked about that for like 15 minutes just by itself. Kind of an interesting experience.
Yeah, I have to admit I didn't know anything about it, but it was interesting to hear his answer to your question and his excitement about it, and some of the players and athletes who are involved. It sounds like a really cool initiative. I'll have to look more into it.
One thing I was going to mention, there are a couple of Cavalry connections to that. When Noah mentioned that team from Canada that was in the final the first year, one of the players on that team was Joe DiChiara, who played for Cavalry the year before. That team actually had a whole bunch of players that played in the CPL based out of Ontario that were basically, they weren't in the league anymore and kind of playing League One Ontario. And they almost won the $1 million. We'll continue to follow Noah's and all the other Calgary players with UBC. We'll follow their careers with interest and see where everything goes. But yeah, definitely, like you said earlier, a good way to end your university career with winning the championship match.
This is Mila Schneider, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Okay, let's move on to NCAA, and the national championship tournaments are underway. And, the team that we've been following probably the most closely right now is the University of Maine Black Bears women's team. And they had their first round matchup this past weekend against Wisconsin. And unfortunately, they got knocked out of the tournament.
Yeah, tough game, but ended in a 3-1 loss to Wisconsin. I think that would be the Badgers.
Yeah.
That ends the Black Bears season. As we've talked about a lot this fall, there's 7 players from Calgary on that main team, including the Schneider sisters. And it's worth mentioning that Mila Schneider, who we had on the podcast about a month ago or so, played every single minute for the Black Bears this season.
One thing I want to mention, and I don't fully understand exactly how it works in NCAA soccer, but they can substitute back and forth, kind of almost like in hockey. You can have a player, start the match, play a bit, then get subbed off, and then get subbed back on again. So when you think about it that way, it's even more remarkable that someone could play every minute, because it would be very easy to take them out for a spell during a game. But yeah, she played every minute.
Absolutely. And we've talked about some of the individual accolades that Mila got and the recognition she got from the NCAA and from the league and the conference. So I won't repeat all of those, but yeah, she's clearly an important member of the University of Maine's women's soccer team. And their season ended earlier than they would have wanted it to, of course, but it was a great year overall. And I'm sure that next year they're going to be a strong team as well.
Mm-hmm. We're going to actually talk about the men's tournament. We've spent very, very little time this season focusing on men's NCAA soccer, but there was one name that was brought to my attention near the end of the year, a Calgary connection on the men's side. And there's been some real success for his team in the tournament even here. So with the University of Vermont.
Yes, and this player is Sidney Watuta. He's former Cavalry U21 player. He is from Calgary, but yeah, his university career has been in Vermont, quite far away from home. And they've had a great season. They won actually earlier today. So we'll be continuing their season, at least one more round of the NCAA tournament.
I can't claim to remember anything from the time when he was with the Cav U21 team, but I did look at some of his stats for this year, and last year he was on the America East All Rookie team, and these 2 years he's played, he's pretty much started almost every game, and he scored, I think 1 goal this year, 2 goals last year. Big guy, 6'3" forward. So we'll follow along and see this upcoming week. On Saturday that they play Hofstra University, and I think Hofstra is a bit of a higher ranked team than they are. So we'll see what happens, but we'll follow that with interest this week. And we still have one more team, I guess we'll follow along during in the post-secondary world for 2024.
That's right. And I just want to give him a shout out for his ability to assist his teammates. Jason, you mentioned how many goals he scored, but according to his stats here, he got 12 assists this season. So, only 1 goal, but he clearly has forged that kind of Olivier Giroud role where he's the forward who is setting up his teammates. So great playmaking abilities or assisting abilities from Sydney Watuta this year.
Hey guys, Scott Kennedy here, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
All right, Jason. So we wanted to end our episode this week by talking about some of the Calgarian players who are playing professionally overseas. This segment was inspired by a former Cavalry player scoring his first hat trick for his club in France.
We ran across this with Goteh Ntignee. I'm sure most people are going to remember he was with Cavalry, and then he got transferred off to FC Annecy, I believe, in the French League 2. And it's kind of been a long road for him. He hasn't really played that much. He got a hat trick this past week, and it was in a cup game. It wasn't in a regular league game, but still, nothing like getting a hat trick to sort of grab people's attention.
Definitely. And his club is doing pretty well. They're in 5th place in Ligue 2 right now. So they are chasing promotion at the moment. It's still very early into the season. Yeah, Goteh Ntignee is an interesting one because he left midway through the 2023 season. He was a great player on the left for Cavalry. He was super fast, great dribbler, kind of filling that hole that had been left by Jose Escalante's departure. And yeah, I'm happy to see that he got a hat trick because, as we know, last year he was really struggling to break into the FC Annecy lineup.
Another Cavalry player that was transferred over to Europe was Bim Pepple. He was transferred to Luton Town, I believe, and he's currently on loan with Southend United, and they're in the National League, which I believe is the 5th level of English soccer. So he's been loaned out a few times over the last couple of years, but I think this is his best stop to date.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think he's still on the books at Luton Town, I believe, but never played for that club, which of course I think most people know got promoted to the Premier League. He's doing great. He's played 12 games for the Shrimpers, as Southend United is known as. He started 10 of those matches. He's gotten 3 goals in league play. And as we talked about previously, he scored that all-important goal in the FA Cup, that winning goal that qualified Southend into the first round. It's the 3rd round of the Cup, but I think it's referred to as the first round proper because that's when you start to see Premier League and Championship teams start their tournaments. Next player we wanted to mention, recent podcast guest Scott Kennedy, playing with a new club in Belgium in the Belgian 2nd division called KAS Eupen. Kennedy has appeared to have become one of the first names on the team sheet for his new club. He's had 8 appearances, 8 starts, regular starter on the back line since his arrival from Austria. Eupen is not doing that well this year. They're in 12th place at the moment, which, considering the financial backing the club has, you know that they're going to be wanting to chase promotion. And at the moment, they're not doing so very well. And another former podcast guest we wanted to mention, Dominick Zator, still playing with Korona Kielce in Poland's top flight. 5 appearances so far this season, 4 starts. not playing as much as his past 2 years. So we were wondering if he might be injured.
He has been a real regular player on that team and a regular starter. So it's definitely less than he's played previously for sure. But
Kelce they've never really been, I think, like a team that challenges for, say, Europe in Poland, but struggling at the moment, 15th place, but they're out of the relegation zone at least.
Yeah, it seems like that team, every year, it's just the goal seems to be not get relegated, and they've been able to keep pulling that off the last few years.
Anyway, the next player we wanted to mention, another former Cavalry player, Victor Loturi, still doing really well with Ross County in Scotland. He's been mostly coming off the bench this year. He's played 7 matches, but only gotten 2 starts. And Ross County are currently in 9th place in the Scottish Premier League.
The last player we want to talk about is actually somebody who has been a Calgarian who's regularly been playing in Europe, but actually doesn't have a club right now.
Yeah, this is Canninga Elva, who is, like you mentioned, his entire career to date has been in Germany, mostly in the 3rd and 4th divisions. Surprised to hear that he's without a club, but I do wonder if that maybe bodes well for homecoming next year. What do you think, Jason?
Well, I'm kind of in the same boat here. I think that you would think, based on his pedigree and what he's done in Germany for the last several years, that he should be able to, get some kind of deal. And maybe he's just at a point right now where, he's committed to coming back and he's playing for St. Lucia right now. And perhaps we'll see him in the CPL in a couple months.
I think he'd be a pretty, not obvious, but logical choice for Tommy Wheeldon Jr., similar to tapping Bradley Camden and saying, hey, do you want to come play in your hometown? Canninga, he's spent his career at a very high caliber, in my opinion. I think when the league started in 2019, he immediately came to mind as, a Calgary-raised player who could be one of the top players in the CPL, I thought at the time. And the reality is that he hasn't moved up he never moved up in Germany beyond the 3rd division. And it appears that his career plateaued a bit over there. I could see him becoming a hometown hero if he came back and played for Cavalry. You and I don't know if that's going to happen, of course, but it does seem like a pretty easy connection to make.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels between him and Bradley Camden Fawo. And I believe Elva is 28 right now. So I think that's maybe a year or so younger than Brad was when he came back to Cavalry. And thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can have this podcast downloaded to your device as soon as it becomes available by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other platforms. Check our website at yycsoccer.com, where you can look through our episode archive and find other options to listen, including our YouTube channel. We also have links on our website on how to buy Scott's book about Calgary soccer history. You can leave a question or comment in the Contact Us section of the website, or you can also interact with us on social media, such as Twitter or Instagram or Blue Sky, where our username is YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.